These flats behind me were built by corrupt councillor T. Dan Smith in the 60s. To him, they were a utopian vision of cities in the sky. To his tenants, they were a social experiment that went drastically wrong. Over Newcastle, a legacy of socialistic 60s architecture is being torn down. Today, social housing is private sector business, yet development capital is thin on the ground. The stabilisation of house prices since the 1990s housing bubble has not made mortgages any more affordable to first-time buyers. What alternatives to entrance to the housing market have? The work hard, get the mortgage expectation of previous generations may be defunct. Who is going to build the affordable homes of the future? Newcastle MP Chi Onwuwa is well aware of the problems that people come to her with in her constituency.
I would say that housing is probably the number one issue that people come to me with, and the range of issues are very broad. It's every aspect of housing, but what's driving it is the lack of affordable housing in Newcastle.
We've got a housing crisis in the fact that we just don't have enough housing, full stop. There's just a shortage of accommodation, and that's a shortage of affordable accommodation in particular.
As well as an affordable home shortage, the so-called housing crisis in Newcastle is characterised by growing waiting lists, an abundance of underused property, and long-term regeneration projects that have yet to provide significant numbers of new homes.
We've seen waiting lists grow horrendously over the last 10 years. That is the result of not building enough houses. It's a result of selling through right to buy, the selling of council houses, and it's the result of extra households being formed.
There is a shortage, and I think that goes back to the days of Margaret Thatcher when the right to buy came in and a lot of council tenants bought their property, but the money was not reinvested to buy new social housing. It went into the government's own coffers.
Statistics from the National Housing Federation, who represent housing associations, show the North East to be the cheapest place in the country to buy property. Despite this, buyers still require several more times the salary to meet market prices.
So the average person in the North East needs a mortgage of 7.9 times their income to be able to buy a property in the North East. Now within the North East there are even hotter spots, as we call them. For example, Morpeth, you need a mortgage of 13 times the average income to buy a property in Morpeth. So owner occupation just isn't on the cards for many, many people. So they're all forced into the rented sector. Private rented accommodation, a lot of it is substandard and expensive, so they go to housing associations and local authorities to try and register on the waiting list, and obviously we don't have enough properties and therefore the waiting lists grow and grow. So to ease this blockage, what we need is more accommodation built. We need more housing built, and that's more owner-occupied housing, that'll bring the price down, and more social rented housing to actually reduce waiting lists. It's quite simple economics.
Local MP Chi Onwuwa believes waiting lists could be reduced by addressing the issue of empty properties.
We have 9,000 people on the waiting list. We have 4,000 empty properties across the city as a whole, not just the constituency. 90% of the housing that's empty is in private hands. So people come to me because they can't get a social housing.
Absentee landlords obviously are a big problem. They're from outside of the area, they've got a lot of money and they can buy a whole street for the cost of one house in London.
A lot of private landlords have come in and bought up new properties, especially in cities like Newcastle. A lot of properties came on the market and were bought by private landlords, and some were let and some were actually just kept empty, and that again artificially inflated the price.
This empty street in Gateshead was compulsory purchased under government-funded initiatives. In Newcastle, large swathes of problematic West End areas were demolished under Going for Growth and now stand barren, though 100 new homes are due to be built soon.
The Going for Growth scheme started over 10 years ago, it was about 12 years ago. When they knocked the existing council houses down, the plan was that new housing would be built within 5 years, and we're 12 years down, there's not one brick being laid yet.
Yeah, we had the whole Bridging Newcastle Gateshead area, the regeneration area, and funding from that was withdrawn, and it was a shame because it was just starting to actually build momentum. It took a lot of time to actually get going, and basically they were just getting there and had the pro forma and the plans and everything, and then funding for that's been cut. Again, really disappointing.
Aspirations for growth under Labour initiatives have fallen short. City Council documents detailing Going for Growth targets of 20,000 new homes by 2020 did not plan for a recession. Currently, the number of new builds under the follow-on initiative, bridging Newcastle Gateshead, has left a total legacy of 244 new builds. That's currently 16,000 short of the target set in the heady days of the boom. Planning consultant Michael Crilly.
The Newcastle and Gateshead Pathfinder programme, it was a follow-up from a lot of the Going for Growth programmes. It was to stimulate the housing market within a lot of the northern conurbations. Newcastle Gateshead was clearly one of those, and there was multiple agendas, but it was driven by regeneration metrics to demolish as well as to refurb and to spend money quickly. In my view, there was a large management structure put around this to deliver a programme that was badly considered, and it was top down, it was bureaucratic, and the figures you can see on their website in the legacy report, 228 million plus spent over the period, equates to something like 345 new builds. So it's quite a lot of money for achieving a small number of additional houses.
So would you say all this wave of various initiatives have ultimately failed?
That's like, what's the point of any of this? I think you go back to how you measure success. There's only way. Has it failed according to the metrics it set itself? It hasn't, because it's spent the money and it's demolished its property, so it's achieved what it set out to achieve. Don't demolish something until you've got an idea and a commitment of what you're going to replace it with. It's got to be better, it's got to be higher quality, it's got to be more sustainable, whatever that means in the definition. So I'm hoping that we're seeing the last of the major master plans. Public sector comes in and tells you what's going to happen, provides a vision for it. Visions don't have to be big and exciting, that can be just how we're going to do it is going to be grassroots.
In academic and planning circles, professionals are critical of the quality of homes and communities that are produced when building eventually does start.
You can see the sort of mismatch between unimaginative houses and many more complex transitions in the life course. Young people who are priced out of the housing market, young families without adequate space, older people living alone in isolation, and a housing market that produces a product that just isn't adaptable, isn't affordable. Yeah, and I would say that the cultural norm of owner occupation is actually completely unsustainable. A brick box building is sort of bankrupt.
It's all speculative. If you're just building crappy little boxes in fields, and the only people who are benefiting from that are the shareholders of Persimmon Homes or Northumberland Estates, mentioned up here. All of those motivations you had as a student or as a young professional are completely lost.
The next stop is Canary Wharf.
The critique of prevalent systems of how we acquire and relate to our homes runs deeper. According to alternate views, the so-called housing crisis is symptomatic of the debt-based economic system. The economic crisis and property ownership are highly intermeshed, as subprime mortgages in the US dramatically demonstrated.
For some reason, housing has always been treated as an asset in life that is something that's of appreciating value. Maybe not for always. This is a quite a contemporary thing. I suppose for the last 70 years, it's been a source of a pension, getting kids through college. You know, why is it that we've distorted this view of what is a fundamental form of belonging, attachment, shelter, security, identity, and it's become this horrendous commodity before all other commodities. And so I think it's interesting that, you know, I'm not mentioning anything that's new in terms of this idea of appreciating other forms of value, but it doesn't seem to be applied to housing. Housing is considered this unique thing that is untouchable. It's everyone's store of wealth. Well, it's a very unequal form of wealth.
What then are the alternatives to current models of design and regeneration?
There's lots of ways of actually combining grassroots supporters together to actually get a building or a site and do what they want to do, set their own parameters for the energy standards, the space standards, the shared elements, whether you have parking or whether you don't. You design it yourself, you do co-design, you scale yourself up. Community land trust, the way I understand it, is one of several models of community ownership. It's not a pension fund necessarily, or a way to invest money and get a payback on it. It's a home to live in and be part of a community.
I see the solution as not being just a housing solution. It's got to be much more of a radical reimagining of how we live our lives. One I've been looking at in particular, which is quite a pragmatic form, is co-housing. It's an idea that draws inspiration from 1960s Danish and Swedish models, but it's been updated and translated to the present day. It's a form of clustered living, so you still have your private home, own front door, but there are many more of those kind of little used spaces and amenities that are stripped out of the home and shared more centrally. So you might have a common house that has some form of, usually does have a form of dining and communal living 2 or 3 times a week. But there's also things like the tool shed or the garden equipment or the laundry or children's play, hobbies.
Now is a good time to change it in the current regime, coalition government, what the RTPI president's trying to do and what is happening within the property market. If that doesn't make you rethink what's important for housing and mixed-use communities and cities, I don't know what will.
Newcastle has rebuilt itself from recession before. This statue is testament to how its citizens have adapted from industrialists to the information age. Large-scale solutions like the 60s flats have been demolished. £1 million government grants are unlikely, if ever, to be seen again. Small-scale grassroots developments such as community land trusts dovetail with a raft of coalition measures designed to empower local initiative. Newcastle, like many a northern city, has faced economic crisis in the past and has gone on to resurgence and recover. Things certainly take a long time, certainly longer than the average parliamentary lifespan, but this city will recover, as it always has done and always will do. There is an irony in this. Labour policy has cleared the homes of former factory workers and grandiose designs of corrupt councillors, leaving bare earth for coalition policies to take root.